In the outskirts of Davao City, beyond the crowded main roads, and deep inside the neighborhoods where life is slow and survival is never guaranteed, lived a skinny, soft-spoken boy named Renzo Malinis. His family's small wooden home leaned against an old Simon Cowell, a structure older than everyone in the barangay. Cracked stone circled its rim, and vines crawled over its sides like nature trying to reclaim what humanity had forgotten. Every morning, before the sun rose and before the city's noise returned, Renzo would drop a rusty tin bucket into the well. The clang echoed downward, followed by a long splash that bounced back up the stone walls. That sound became the soundtrack of his childhood. Renzo's family lived in deep poverty. They owned no refrigerator, no clean water supply, and no reliable electricity. When storms hit Davao, their roof often leaked in multiple places, forcing them to put out basins and pails to catch the dripping rain. Renzo's father worked long hours at the pier hauling cargo for low pay, and his mother washed clothes for neighbors to earn a few pesos. But even with both parents working tirelessly, the family struggled to afford rice, medicine, and school supplies. Renzo wore the same faded shirt for nearly 3 years, washing it by hand using water pulled from that same cow well. Poverty wasn't just part of his environment, it shaped every hour of his life. Yet Renzo had something rare, a voice that didn't belong to poverty. When he sang beside the cow well, the neighbors would gather around, holding their breath as his voice echoed through the stone chamber like a natural amplifier. People would whisper, "He sounds like Elvis. The boy sounds exactly like Elvis." The resemblance was uncanny. The tone, the soul, the depth, a raw, emotional power that didn't match his fragile appearance. Renzo didn't know how to read music, but he understood emotion. And every note he sang carried the weight of hunger, hope, struggle, and dreams buried under hardship. On weekends, he performed near jeepney terminals, on small market corners, and outside sari-sari stores. Some days, he earned enough for a small meal. Other days, he returned home empty-handed but still smiling, telling his mother, "Next time will be better." His dream, his one true dream, was to stand on the America's Got Talent stage, the same stage he watched on a small borrowed phone with low battery and cracked glass. He watched how Simon Cowell reacted to great singers, the way his face changed, the way he pressed the golden buzzer. Renzo imagined himself there, singing not as a poor boy from Davao, but as someone the world finally recognized. And one day, after collecting coins for months, working small gigs, and saving every peso he could, Renzo made a decision that would alter his destiny. He would go to America and audition, no matter how impossible it seemed. Standing beside the cow well at sunrise, he whispered to himself, "One chance, that's all I need." When Renzo stepped into the massive America's Got Talent theater, it felt like he had been transported into another universe. A universe where dreams weren't far away, where lights were brighter than the sun over Davao, and where opportunities felt almost too big to touch. The stage floor was shiny and flawless, the air was cold from the strong AC, and the audience stretched farther than any crowd he had ever sung for. Back home, his audiences were tricycle drivers, market vendors, curious neighbors, and dogs wandering the street. Here, the front row alone held more people than his entire neighborhood. Renzo's thrift store jacket hung loosely on his thin shoulders. He had used water from the Simon Cowell well to wash it before leaving Davao, scrubbing it with his hands and drying it under the sun. He knew he didn't look like most AGT contestants. His shoes were worn on the sides. His haircut was done at home with scissors that didn't cut evenly, and his hands shook with nerves. But the microphone in front of him felt familiar. It represented his whole life. When Simon Cowell looked at him, Renzo felt the weight of that stare. Simon had seen thousands of performers. He had judged legends. And now he was examining a poor Filipino boy who looked both terrified and determined. Simon raised an eyebrow, almost skeptically, as if unsure what Renzo was about to do. The audience whispered. Some leaned in, some leaned back. He could hear a few people say, "He looks too young, too scared, too simple." But they didn't know Renzo. They didn't know the sound that lived inside him. He closed his eyes. In that instant, the world disappeared. The AGT stage dissolved from his mind. Instead, he imagined the Simon Cowell, the damp air rising from its opening, the cool stone against his palms, and the echo that always returned his voice like a promise that greatness was possible. He remembered singing barefoot on rainy nights, practicing even when his stomach hurt from hunger. He remembered his father telling him, "When you sing, you don't sound poor. You sound powerful." And then he released the first note. The theater froze. His voice poured out with a deep, velvet richness, so close to Elvis Presley's that jaws dropped instantly. Some people immediately covered their mouths. Some sat up straight. The judges exchanged wide-eyed glances. Simon Cowell leaned forward, stunned, as if he had just heard something impossible, as if time had bent and let the past reappear on stage. Renzo's voice climbed, dipped, vibrated, and resonated with raw soul. Every line he delivered carried emotion pulled from years of hardship and the echoing memory of the well in Davao. By the second verse, the audience wasn't just listening, they were mesmerized. This wasn't imitation. This wasn't a gimmick. This was a boy who had lived through pain and turned it into art so powerful it could silence thousands. When Renzo finished the final note, the last vibrations of his voice lingered in the theater, like a ghost refusing to leave. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody clapped. Nobody even breathed too loudly. There was only stunned silence, the kind that only happens when something extraordinary has just taken place. Then, like a wave that finally crashes, the crowd exploded. The applause was thunderous, shaking the floor. People stood instantly shouting, cheering, crying. Some held their hands above their heads in disbelief. Renzo blinked hard, overwhelmed. The lights blurred, and tears slowly gathered in his eyes. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The same boy who once sang beside an old cowbell with no audience except his own echo was now receiving a standing ovation from thousands of people in America. His chest tightened with emotion. Simon Cowell stood up slowly, staring at Renzo as if examining a miracle. His usually controlled expression melted into something shockingly sincere. Disbelief, admiration, and respect rolled into one. When Simon finally spoke, his voice carried a mixture of awe and certainty. "That voice is Elvis!" The crowd roared again. Renzo's heart pounded as he held the microphone tighter, his hands trembling uncontrollably. He could feel every emotion from his childhood, the hunger, the long nights, the sacrifices, the dreams whispered into the darkness of the cow well, all rising to the surface. Then, without warning, without hesitation, Simon slammed the golden buzzer. The sound boomed through the theater. Golden lights burst open above him, and confetti rained down like a hurricane of blessings. The gold pieces shimmered in the spotlight, filling the air around him, sticking to his clothes, landing on his face, swirling around him like a dream becoming solid. Renzo fell to his knees. He didn't try to stop his tears now. He let them fall freely. The judges rushed toward him. Sophia hugged him tightly. Heidi held his hands with tears in her eyes. Howie shook his shoulders, shouting, "This is what talent looks like!" But Renzo wasn't hearing everything clearly. His heartbeat drowned out the world. He kept whispering, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." But even with all the noise, all the confetti, all the celebration, Renzo's thoughts drifted back to Davao. He imagined his mother washing clothes by the cowwell. He imagined his father working in the heat. He imagined the nights he practiced his voice while mosquitoes circled around him. He imagined his siblings waiting for news. And he whispered one final sentence under his breath. "This is for us, all of us." For the first time in his life, Renzo wasn't just a poor boy with a dream. He was a global phenomenon, a miracle born from struggle, shaped by hardship, and lifted by pure, undeniable talent.